Man Visible and Invisible by C.W. Leadbeater. Chapter 3. Clairvoyant Sight. This brings before us another important consideration. All these varieties of finer matter exist not only in the world without, but they exist in man also. He has not only the physical body, which we see, but he has also within him what we may describe as bodies appropriate to these various planes of nature, and consisting in each case of their matter. In man's physical body, there is etheric matter, as well as the solid matter, which is visible to us. And this etheric matter is readily visible to the clairvoyant. In the same way, a more highly developed clairvoyant, who is capable of perceiving the more refined astral matter, sees the man represented at that level of mass of that matter, which is in reality his body or vehicle as regards that plane. And exactly the same thing is true with regard to the mental plane in its turn. The soul of man has not one body, but many bodies, for when sufficiently evolved, he is able to express himself on all these different levels of nature. He is therefore provided with a suitable vehicle of the matter belonging to each, and it is through these various vehicles that he is able to receive impressions from the world to which they correspond. We must not think of the man as creating these vehicles for himself in the course of his future evolutions, for every man possesses them from the beginning, though he is by no means conscious of their existence. We are constantly using to a certain extent, this higher matter within ourselves, even though it be unconsciously. Every time that we think, we set in motion the mental matter within us, and a thought is clearly visible to a clairvoyant as a vibration in that matter, set up, first of all, within the man, and then affecting matter of the same degree of density in the world around him. But before this thought can be effective on the physical plane, it has to be transferred from that mental plane into astral matter, and when it has excited similar vibrations in that astral matter, it in turn affects the etheric matter, creating sympathetic vibrations in it, and that in turn acts upon the denser physical matter, the gray matter of the brain. So every time we think, we go through a much longer process than we know. Just as every time we feel anything, we go through a process of which we are quite unconscious. We touch some substance and we feel that it's too hot, and we snatch away our hand from it instantaneously as we think. But science teaches us that this process is not instantaneous, and that it is not the hand which feels, but the brain, that the nerves communicate the idea of intense heat to the brain, which at once telegraphs back along the nerve threads the instruction to withdraw the hand. And it is only as a result of all this that the withdrawal takes place. Though it seems to us to be immediate, the process has a definite duration which can be measured by sufficiently fine instruments. The rate of its motion is perfectly well defined and known to physiologists. Just the same way that thought appears to be an instantaneous process, but it is not, for every thought has to go through the stages that I have described. Every impression which we receive in our brain goes through the senses and has to pass up through various grades of matter before it reaches the real man, the ego, the soul within. We have here a kind of system of telegraphy between the physical plane and the soul, and it's important to realize that this telegraph line has intermediate stations. It's not only from the physical plane that impressions can be received. The astral matter within a man, for example, is not only capable of receiving a vibration from etheric matter and transmitting it to the mental matter, but it is also quite capable of receiving impressions from the surrounding matter of its own plane and transmitting those through the mental body to the real man within. So the man may use his astral body as a means for receiving impressions from and observing the astral world which surrounds him, and in exactly the same way, through his mental body, he may observe and obtain information from the mental world. But in order to do either of these things, he must first learn how they are done. That is to say, he must learn to focus his consciousness in his astral body or in his mental body, just as it is now focused in the physical brain. I have already treated this subject fully in my book Clairvoyance, so that I need do no more than refer to it here. It should always be remembered that all this is a matter of direct knowledge and certainty to those who are in the habit of studying it, although it is presented to the consideration of the world merely as a hypothesis, but even the man who approaches this subject for the first time must surely see that in suggesting this, we are not in any way claiming faith in a miracle, but simply inviting investigation of a system. The higher grades of matter follow on in orderly sequence from those which we already know, so that, though to some extent each plane may be regarded as a world in itself, it is yet also true that the whole is in reality one great world, which can be fully seen only by the highly developed soul. To aid us in our grasp of this, let's take an illustration, which, although impossible in itself, may yet be useful as suggesting rather startling possibilities. Suppose that instead of the sight that we now possess, we had a visual apparatus arranged somewhat differently. In the human eye, we have both solid and liquid matter. Suppose that both these orders of matter were capable of receiving separate impressions, but each only from that type of matter in the outside world to which it corresponded. Suppose, also, that among men some possessed one of these types of sight and some another. Consider how very curiously imperfect would be the concept of the world obtained by each of these two men. Imagine them as standing on a seashore. One, being able to see only the solid matter, would be utterly unconscious of the ocean that stretched before him, but would see instead the vast cavity of the ocean bed with all its possible inequities, and the fishes and other inhabitants of the deep would appear to him as floating in air above this enormous valley. If there were clouds in the sky, they would be entirely invisible to him, since they are composed of matter in the liquid state. For him, the sun would always be shining in the daytime, and he would be unable to comprehend on what to us is a cloudy day. On what to us is a cloudy day, its heat should be so much diminished. If a glass of water were offered to him, it would appear to him to be empty. Now contrast this with the appearance which would be presented before the eyes of a man who saw only matter in the liquid condition. He would indeed be conscious of the ocean, but for him the shore and the cliffs would not exist, and he would perceive the clouds very clearly, but he would see almost nothing of the landscape over which they were moving. In the case of a glass of water, he would be entirely unable to see the vessel, and would therefore be unable to understand why the water should so mysteriously preserve the special shape given to it by the invisible glass. Imagine these two persons standing side by side, describing the landscape as they saw it, and each feeling perfectly certain that there could be no other kind of sight but his in the universe, and that anyone claiming to see anything more or anything different must necessarily be either a dreamer or a deceiver. We can smile over the incredulity of these hypothetical observers, but it is increasingly difficult for the average man to realize that in proportion to the whole that is to be seen, his power of vision is very much more imperfect than either of theirs would be in relation to the world as he sees it. And he also is strongly disposed to hint that those who see a little more than he does must really be drawing on their imagination for their alleged facts. It is one of the commonest of our mistakes to consider that the limit of our power of perception is also the limit of all that there is to perceive. Yet the scientific evidence is indisputable, and the infinitesimal portion as compared to the whole of the groups of vibrations which alone we can see or hear is a fact about which there can be no doubt. The clairvoyant is simply a man who develops within himself the power to respond to another octave out from the stupendous gamut of possible vibrations, and so enables himself to see more of the world around him than those of more limited perception.